How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're gonna build off our discussion that we had a few weeks ago about how inmates conceal, basically the method behind the hide, the motive behind the hide. Today's topic is going to be about the inmate psychology, why inmates hide contraband, and how to read their behavior. This is going to come from Chapter 1, Section 1 of a book that me and Russ are co-authoring called Into the Hide. This is a picture of the cover. Guys, we have a long ways to go before finishing this. A lot of people have been asking, but we're kind of just started on this. There's a lot to be covered. Me and Russ are trying to approach it in a very detailed fashion, but we also want to make it engaging. So we're pulling back on a lot of Russ's experience. And then I'm going to try to add to that just multiple ways of looking at things to try to give people a complete, or as close as you can to a complete picture. Nothing is going to be 100% when it comes to that complete picture, but we are going to give you what we could as close as possible. And hopefully it gives you enough so you're able to apply it when needed. And guys, don't forget, I have other books on the market. If you get your chance, check out Amazon. I got couple of books on soft cover, a couple of books available just through ebook. And then if you want books through my publisher, Blue 360 Media, those are books you can't find anywhere else. Please go to blue360media.com and you can see my books there as well. A lot of books there, guys, for anyone in this profession. Trust and believe, whether you're civilian, medical, custody, rookie, senior, supervisor, administration. I mean, the list goes on. Let me get Russ. What up, Russ?
Hey, Anthony, how's it going, sir?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. My name's Russ Hamilton. I'm a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer for a local county near here. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos on Facebook. And I currently work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail where I'm a case manager, and for a local county probation department. I am also most recently a brand new author with a book called Killing Complacency, which is dedicated towards educating people in our profession about tactical awareness for correctional professionals, and teaching them essential strategies for surviving in the high threat environment that we walk into willingly each and every day.
Yes, guys, and it's a book you got to get your hands on. Guys, you got to get your hands on all these books. There's a lot of information there, and then, not just for you to absorb, but maybe for you to translate to others. It's never too late to pick up a book and learn yourself, and then maybe share the knowledge. That's what these books are created for. Make a lesson out of it. Do what you can. I mean, eventually me and Russ, we may step aside one day, and hopefully these lessons become legacy lessons that are shared just to hold on to that foundational element of what we expect from people that work in corrections, the knowledge that we expect them to know going in. So now these questions we're going to ask today, there's a few. They relate to Chapter 1, Section 1 of the book we're writing, Inside the Hide. I think there's a lot of good questions here. Now, again, when you look at the book, obviously it's a bit more of a narrative format. It's going to start off at the very beginning, for example, with a story from Russ. It's going to be broken into 3 lessons, and then we're going to apply the psychological to it. And it's really just a very good Section 1. I'm telling you guys, the stuff that you're going to learn, like every section just has so many nuggets that you could take from. And then Russ's application of the knowledge, just to show you that this does work in real time. And these are the lessons that we're losing, guys. They really are, because when you read the stuff that Russ is tossing our way through his experiences, when you combine it with the stuff I'm adding, kind of like the psychological profiling, guys, these lessons, they're being lost today. This is senior staff experienced lessons, veteran lessons that when we get staff leaving the profession, these lessons are being left behind. This is me and Russ's way of trying to keep those lessons intact. So again, the title is Inmate Psychology, Why Inmates Hide Contraband and How to Read Their Behavior. So me and Russ are going to explore these questions that are from Chapter 1, Section 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and read the questions. Russ will go first. I'll compliment, and then we'll kind of follow that rhythm straight to the end. So Russ doesn't know what these questions are, because how we're doing this, guys, just to let you know, is we are using Claude, and we told Claude what type of book we want to write. And then Claude sends us a list of questions that we need to answer that then help us formulate a chapter. It's a pretty impressive tool. It really is extremely helpful. It helps you push things out there that would normally be extremely time consuming, and it saves you a lot of money from editing and all these other things. But there are a lot of questions, and you have to make sure you're not answering the same thing. And sometimes you put too much in and the AI goes to shit. But either way, we work it out, we make it happen, and it's pretty impressive what comes out when you finally get all those thoughts put into a chapter. So Russ, first question. What's the biggest misconception correctional officers have about why inmates hide contraband?
I think that people are kind of, locked in to, understanding kind of the general dynamics of, what goes on with contraband. But I think that, we're really taking it to a different level where we're examining things, both at the microscopic and macroscopic, and trying to give people an insight with how to creatively think in order to be able to understand it in a way that they can actually get ahead and find these hides, find this contraband, and be able to, really get inside the inmate's brain with what I call in their tactical empathy. And I think that once they read the opening part of this, where I kind of interweave three different stories of three different things that happened to me at the exact same spot, more or less, over a relatively short period of my career, which was about 2 years. I think that they're going to, start to see, and that was actually that area was like 2 years, but I also had 2 years in before that. I think that they're going to be able to really kind of like leverage some of these concepts in ways that I came to it, and be able to be much more successful and much more dynamic, and really be able to be that impact player. I don't know, what did you think of the initial stories that we're using to open the book with?
No, I think the stories are very useful. So basically what we're doing is we have to show that there's real world application to the lesson. So basically we are putting in these books the whys. I think when you do searches, you may get so caught up with the actual location, you get happy that you found something, but I don't think we ask questions as what's the motive of hiding it there? What were they trying to accomplish? What was the person thinking? I mean, there's so much there, including, when Russ covers his story about knowing your environment, knowing the people in your unit, know how they work. I mean, were you meant to find that? Were you not meant to find it? So there's a lot. And when Russ, his very first story is over a 2-year progression where basically he's very reactionary at the very beginning. And then it turns out to be, as he progresses into 2 years, he's more about reading the signs and basically becoming very preventive, where he gets ahead of what the issues could be. So it's funny because it goes from reacting, so the incident already happened, to catching it, why it's happening. And then the third story is getting ahead of it before it happens without giving up too much details. And then we go ahead in the first section, explain what are some of the motives that people would have to hide contraband. And yes, people may think, well, of course we know why they want to hide contraband. And they'll list their things like financial gain, testing, self-preservation, ego, pride. The list goes on. But the key is that there are components to the why that also can help lead you to the where. Understanding how the game works, especially, we also start talking about the difference between group hides and individual hides, and how money could get moved versus just a stash that needs to stay in play. So there's a lot there that plays into why things happen. I think that's kind of what we always write about. We always we try to provide the tactical, but we also want you to get into the mindset of both the person doing it, like what should you be thinking, etc. But like Russ said, the tactical empathy. Why are they doing it? Why are they doing it here? Why is this area vulnerable? Why are they doing it when I'm here? What am I doing wrong? Where's the blind spots? So there's a lot that has to be covered. And when me and Russ started doing this book, we didn't think it was going to be as complex in its simplicity, because it is complex, but we're trying to translate it to for a way for it could be applied, picked up and applied. But with that said, guys, there's just so many angles that you really have to understand those angles, because each angle leads you to something different. So in this question here, what's the biggest misconception correctional officers have about why inmates hide contraband? I think, to be honest with you, there's a lot more motives than people could think. As I said, it goes way past self-preservation. It goes way past financial gains. I mean, it could just be things they do for fun. It could be a way to test staff, to test areas. It could be a way to build power, a way to create a reputation, a way to earn some credibility. I mean, there's just so many reasons. And when you understand that, not only do you have an understanding of, why the item may be hidden the way it is, layered, maybe there's a decoy, maybe there's some misdirection, but you also start to understand the importance of this environment, how this environment works, the pressures that also can have an effect on how people hide things. And I think, to be honest with you, what me and Russ are teaching does focus a lot on how situational factors affect the individual, and then how that can turn into kind of like a cat and mouse game for staff, sadly. So again, it's complex, but it's simplistic enough for it to be applied to anybody who you give the book to. All right, so that's the first question. Second question, Russ, can you tell the difference between an inmate hiding out of fear versus hiding for profit just by watching their behavior?
So, there's a lot of complexity with that, because, a lot of your observations are taking place, before you find something, or before you discover something in their area. It's not, clearly cut and dried in that, it's just, you just have to, kind of look at the totality of the circumstances, for lack of a better term. I have found things that were, clearly part of a profit-driven motive. I tell a story in there about 3 cell phones that I find that still have the stickers, covering the screens and so forth. And that was obvious, brand new cell phones, with sequential serial numbers. And you just know that, people were buying these in bulk. They had a conduit to bring them in, and their particular motive obviously was profit. They were doing this, at a level where, they were bringing in massive amounts of these phones. So, there's other times, where we're looking at, are inmates doing something, out of fear? Are they arming themselves out of fear? And then where really is that dividing line? What's the difference between doing something out of fear and doing something out of fear, but then all that you might be able to go on the offense? And so, we're trying to break all of these things down and make it exhaustive, yet in a way that doesn't, bore you or put you into, sleep mode. I'm going into quite a few details and personal stories and things that, I found out about myself and my own viewpoints on things, as I kind of trained myself. Not to say I didn't have some great mentors, because I really did. But a lot of it just came, at my own direction, really trying to, learn the craft and learn the art, and to really, try and become that. I always wanted to be, that impact player, the person that shows up and makes things happen, if you will. And I'll leave it to others to judge whether I really was that or not.
Yeah, and guys, listen, not everything's always going to be 100%. Like, I'll give a perspective here. Not everything's going to fit that perspective, but it is good to understand how this works, and it's a good starting point. So, again, you can have someone that's strategic and always thinks more long term and can be pushed into a corner, and now they're in survival mode. And you could have someone that's in survival mode, always constantly dealing with pressure, and then eventually starts to absorb it and becomes more strategic. So again, for me, when it goes, can you tell the difference between an inmate hiding out of fear versus hiding for profit? I think usually people that hide out of fear, but nothing's 100% because I just gave you the caveat on the other side. But most part, what they're hiding may be extremely accessible. It may be very quick for them to get to. It may be less planned because, again, they're looking to survive. I don't got time to put a plan together. Let me get something next to me, something that I can grab, maybe found on my person, could be found within my area. Again, and then also they may have a fear of getting caught, but at the end of the day, self-preservation will supersede all that. But it doesn't mean they're calm. Because these guys may not be people that are experts at hiding things. So they may have giveaways. The fear may leak out. But with that said, usually it's people that are more impulsive and being emotionally driven. Now, those that go for profit, again, nothing's 100%. I gave you the adverse, but for the most part, you may have people that may operate a bit of a group. They're going to make sure they protect what that profit is, maybe because that also could be a level of self-preservation. Usually under multiple types of concealment motives, you're going to find some level of survival or self-preservation, because even if it's someone that's making profit and leading a group, well, they got to maintain a reputation. So they don't want their stuff being caught. But most of the time, these people could be a bit more confident, even when they're doing searches, because they assume that, you know what, they're not going to catch me because I'm that good, or maybe that officer is just not as smart as me. So these guys may be more layered, less impulsive, more long-term. They may even set up little games like little decoys, or, maybe contraband's distributed amongst their group. So there's some misdirection there. But again, for me, fear, but again, nothing's 100%. You're going to find more impulsive hides, more hides that are close to the individual, and someone that's not as secure. So again, you could look for some type of emotional leakage. And for people that could be profit driven, and this is something, again, they've been in the game for a while, because I've dealt with these inmates, they may not even be the ones that are directly connected to the contraband because they have their layers of protection as well. But sometimes their ego could be a concern for them, because they could be confident until they get caught, and they could slip from that complacency. But with that said, usually the people that are making business and are successful inside that, they're going to probably have processes that are a little bit more layered, a little bit more complex, not as simple. And again, it's because they've been at the game for a while. They're very strategic and they think long haul. And when I talk about complexity, it's not just about knowing the environment. It's knowing the routines. It's knowing how the facility is laid out, where those cameras are. I mean, these people are literally having everything to work with, because they take their time, they think about it, and they run, as me and Russ even said in the book, maybe little tests to see where these hotspots are, where do these officers favor, where do they don't favor, what are the blind spots, and they start working on their strategy based on the vulnerabilities that they have exploited. So that's mentioned in the book, and that's going to complement Russ's stories as well. So again, the difference between an inmate hiding out of fear, you may find more impulsive, so things that are not as well hidden, not as well layered, not as well protected, both the individual as well as the hide. And then for profit, maybe it's not someone as sloppy, and maybe it's more layered, more protected. All right, hold on, get the next one. So Russ, how does the institutional environment itself create the psychological need to conceal things?
Well, I would take one step back from that and say, it's not as much the institutional environment, from the standpoint of, while it is true that, all of these people are in a really, concentrated type of area. And by concentrated, I mean the number of people in that area that are, antisocial personality types. That is the most important thing to know. The second part that you take away from that is, what is revealed about each individual, as far as overall, they have, this huge list of criminogenic needs. And so when you start viewing it through the lens of criminogenic needs, you automatically come to the conclusions about what it is that they need to do and why they do it. None of this stuff is much different from what they were doing out on the street. You know, were they selling drugs out on the street? Yes, certainly some of them were. Were some of them really hard clicked up with a bunch of, you know, other STG types? Certainly that was true there. And it's even much more concentrated and less dilute as you get into, you know, what happens inside an institution. And so everything that we see or tend to see inside corrections is just something that's a lot less dilute than what you see out there on the streets. And so that's the way you really have to look at it. You know, we as correctional law enforcement are in a position where everyone that we deal with is pretty much a criminal, right? And, you know, out there on the street level surface of things, you know, it's a bunch of, you know, different people, where very few of the people that street level officers deal with are hardcore criminals. Most of what they deal with are victims, and then they go and arrest those people. And so I think that that's kind of the way that that I view it, and I hope there's a good takeaway there with regards to how to view it from that level.
Yeah, now, guys, remember the questions we're asking right now are really not fluid. They'll be a little bit more fluid in the book. They kind of feed off each other as the book evolves into the discussions. And it's great because we also put in some of our transcripts as well from the shows. But for here, how does the institutional environment itself create the psychological need to conceal things? Guys, I get phone calls from family members all the time. And, of course, when the son's going through a concern and you try to tell them, hey, to some extent, this is what your son may have done. Oh, not my son. And the first thing I'm quick to say is, ma'am, you really don't know your son behind the wall, because there's different pressures and you don't understand how pressure can change people. Us in corrections, we understand that. That's pretty much the dynamic in corrections. There's pressure, whether seen or unseen. It's definitely felt. And this can cause people to commit to things that they may not normally commit to. So, yes, you have the people that apply the pressure. This is what they do. This is who they are. This is, you know, the type of world that they thrive in. But then you also may get people who may have done a crime but are not used to this side of things. You know, maybe their crime was some blue collar crime or just something not like this, that they're the world that they're in now. And now they're absorbed in what Russ said is that criminality, the, you know, how to run things, how to move things. And sometimes they could be forced to do something that they don't want to do, but they need to survive. Their self-preservation is key. And when someone is backed in a corner and they need to survive, they will possibly change a little of who they are to do what must be done. So now they become nothing but a function of whatever that system is that is trying to utilize them. So I like people to understand that the conceal is usually pushed by pressure. And what do I mean by pressure is it can come from different ways. A couple of things here could be pressure for a reputation, pressure for credibility, pressure for financial gain, pressure to survive. You know, that usually is somewhere at the foundation of most things. Obligation. You know, hey, I had your back. I need you to have my back now. You know, again, so there's a lot of pressure that will force somebody to act. And for people that want to understand behavior, you got to understand behavior from, as best you can, the situations that the people are being pressured with and how the many ways that they could subjectively receive those pressures. Because, again, someone could pressure me one way and I do something totally different than someone pressuring Russ. So you have to kind of really get into the head safely, like Russ said, tactical empathy, and you really have to get to know these inmates and try to get an understanding of how that pressure will convert action through that individual. And you have to try to do your best to remove yourself and think like they would. So again, pressure. And in corrections, pressure is very intense in correction because the environment itself is a lot smaller and more aggressive. All right, so next one. Why do inmates return to some hiding spots even after they've been caught there before?
Oh, this is one that I've seen happen actually many times, and I think it's kind of a little bit hard to answer. But I think that sometimes what happens is they experience a level of success against staff, and maybe different staff members are coming in there and they're not just searching in the same way, and then all of a sudden, and like I say, I've had this happen so many times now that you bring that up that I can't even hardly believe it happened this way. But I've caught the same inmate hiding things in the same place, and the only difference between then and now is 6 or 8 months. I think that I could try and look at this and try and figure it out psychologically and try and say that, well, they had success there before, and that's probably true. I think that the actual answer is maybe a little bit more mundane than that. For the most part, I don't think that we're dealing with rocket scientists. I think that we're dealing with, antisocial personality types. We're dealing with all of these competing and sometimes complementing criminogenic needs. And I think that all of that just goes to a point that they have a limited number of areas of access. And then you couple that with needing to be able to access it. And then you couple that with they have to have that particular contraband, up underneath their security and their control. And with all of those things together, sometimes that's all they've got left. Sometimes it's just that there's not enough creativity or enough time or enough effort, opportunity, all those things that I've mentioned to be able to, come up with something new. It's just limited. And that's just the truth of the matter. And I'm not saying that that is the case every time, but sometimes, any port in a storm is better than just leaving it out there bare, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I actually had to sleep on this question a little bit. This was one of the questions about 2 nights ago I got stuck on, and it was about 2 a.m. Mind you, I had to get up to work by 5 or 5:30, and I wanted to answer this. So I kind of thought in my head for a little bit, and the first thing I thought about were inmates that kept on getting caught with weapons in their cell. And I said, well, they're not trying to hide the weapon, they're trying to survive. So you find a weapon and they don't care about getting caught, you're going to find a weapon there again, and you're going to find a weapon there again. And you're going to find that with inmates that are very nervous and they know they got to go out to GP and they want to protect themselves. So they don't really care about getting caught with the weapon. They don't. At the end of the day is that weapon is their self-preservation. You catch it, I'm going to get another one. I don't care about the charges. You're always going to find a weapon on my person. So now with that said, I've also did some other things. Now, nothing's 100%, and the book's going to explore this a little bit more. But, inmates look at everything. So if you're talking about a strategic inmate, so not an impulsive inmate, but an inmate that's strategic, that winds up keeping on falling to the same area, they may also have justifications in their head as to why they got caught. Like it wasn't a slip up, it was luck, or we don't usually get that officer, or they don't usually check there, or they may not check there again because they just checked there. So they have a lot of reasons to reemploy that same hiding spot. And I like what Russ added. There's also limited opportunity. So again, for me, I think it really depends on what their focus is. If their focus is they don't really care about getting caught and it's more about accessibility, and again, really defined by self-preservation, if they get caught, they'll make another one. If they get caught, they'll make another one. I mean, but if it's something strategic that does affect the long game, then obviously there's probably going to be a little bit more planning. And if the person keeps on getting caught and they keep on losing, let's say what could be some level of financial gain or something that relates to their status or whatnot, then that person is probably going to start being removed. Because at the end of the day, concealment, and me and Russ were talking about this before, it's very innovative. You got to realize something. Once you catch something, the game shifts and they're going to find another spot. So you also have to be very careful of when you pounce, because when you pounce, if you don't have other areas closed off, they're going to get to those other areas. So when you pounce and you know that spot, you pounce and you close all doors. because the moment you have one door open, then there's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. So with that said, I believe that for people that tend to get caught and continue using the same hiding spot, I think there's a lot in play. But if you get to know the inmate and you get to understand why, then you notice, are they really trying to hide it, or do they just want to have it accessible? And that matters. Again, Russ, and I'm sure this is true for you too, Russ. How many times you catch a person with a weapon and it's like, why, you keep on hiding it under your bed? What, are you stupid? You're going to get caught. And the inmate's like, I don't give a shit about getting caught. I really don't. I want the weapon.
Yeah, if I can introduce one slightly different train of thought there, one thing that people should be aware of, and I know it just happens naturally when you and I are talking back and forth, but when we're talking about not caring about getting caught, it's not necessarily that they don't care about getting caught by us, because sometimes they do, because sometimes there's consequences, but the consequences that we can impose upon them for getting caught are a lot less severe than for them getting caught for not having that. And not all STGs operate the same way. And there's different things across the country, but there are some STGs out there, and there are some circumstances, especially at higher levels, maybe they're lifers or whatever, where their STGs tell them flat out, you better not get caught without a shank at any point. And so for them, do you think that they really care about what we're doing in that respect? Hell no. They care about, making sure that, hey, they're getting caught on a regular basis. And, maybe they're going to SEG, maybe they're doing, a little bit of, stint in a step down or RHU or something. But that's nothing compared to, being found out, hey, you didn't have a weapon on you. Why? We were going to war with this other STG. And now you're in trouble with us, and so you're gonna be removed, or you're gonna be removed through a stabbing, or what? Maybe this is the last time that we tolerate you doing that, or maybe you're gonna have to put in some more work and bring in some more dope. So there's a lot to that, and I think people should understand that consequences and accountability happen on both sides of the equation. And so when we're talking about what we see as accountability, oftentimes we're forgetting about the accountability that happens on the other side of that equation.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, when people find their fines, they get caught up in, I got the fine, but they never really understand why the fine was there. Well, he wanted to make money. Really? Or was he a runner? Or was he a person? I mean, it's good to know, because then if it is part of a system, what part of the system have you just affected? Did I affect the main source? Did I affect just one of the runners? Did I affect someone that's being forced to hold it? There's a lot in play here that me and Russ have been discovering while we're writing the book. Now, one of the questions this one we just did, one of the questions that was asked to me today was a unique one. It said, who's more dangerous, the strategic inmate or the impulsive inmate? And obviously the question really is a question that's going to have both. I just want to let me explain how this question happened. So the question right here is, what's happening psychologically when the inmate feels cornered, and how does that change their hiding behavior? And when I answered it back, there was a follow-up question that kind of asked about strategic versus the impulsive. Now, granted, there are hides based out of desperation, or someone looking to survive or whatnot, maybe last minute trying to keep that reputation when they know they're losing it, or got to get some money, let's do something. So, I mean, obviously someone that's strategic could easily become impulsive when the pressure hits them. And someone that's impulsive may know eventually through routine how to absorb stuff and then become very strategic just because the pressure has become routine. So again, the more immediate threat is always going to be someone that's cornered. So don't think that all because this person's a longtime thinker strategically that they can't be a threat in a moment either. If they get caught where there's backed in the corner, you're not understanding all the pressures that they're facing, they could react and come at you just to come at you. I mean, again, they're cornered, and you have someone that's impulsive, and like, oh, that person is just impulsive. Maybe, but it looks like they've been kind of surviving here. However paranoid they may be, they've been kind of surviving in this unit for quite some time. So eventually they learn, they adjust, they adapt, and the once impulsive individual is now extremely experienced and has extreme, not extreme, but has very good strategic measures based on that experience. So it's crazy how, time will change things. Someone that strategic could easily start losing their way, making bad, decisions. And all of a sudden now they're impulsive because, they're reacting and not responding. And then you get someone who's been impulsive that now is just got a plan because they've been doing it for so long. So again, if an inmate feels cornered, how does that change the hiding behavior? I think in this case here, when someone becomes cornered, you got to be careful because they could be more impulsive. They could be more emotionally driven. And at that point there, I think you have to be ready to react. And there's a story that Russ mentions. I hope we bring it up because we had to redo the book. So hopefully Russ remembers some of the stories that were in the other one, because as I said, Claude took a crap on us and I don't want to overwhelm it. I put too much in. But there was a story that Russ brought in where there was some pressure put on someone who was strategic. And again, not giving away too much of the story, but all of a sudden Russ realized, like, this isn't the long game now. This is not something we could wait. I don't got time. I got to act, because if I don't act, this person's going to basically jump and be foolish. So I thought that was good, because Russ was used to dealing with this guy in a strategic way. But then eventually when Russ knew that they kind of had the guy cornered, Russ knew, okay, at this point, now it's time to go in, because now this person is going to jump. And I think now we have to get ahead before they do. But Russ, what's your thoughts? Try not to give away too much of the story.
Yeah, I would just point out that, like, when we use terminology like that, well, someone's feeling cornered. I think that the natural response of correctional staff should be to investigate that further. Cornered by who? Cornered by us? Cornered by an STG? Cornered by his ethnic affiliation? Cornered by his family or some circumstance? So don't let it just rest and let everyone assume that, hey, we're the ones putting the pressure on. We should be the ones putting the pressure on, but sometimes we just don't count for shit, to be honest, in the big picture. And so I would just caution you that in all of these things, there are different sides to the equation, and being able to look at them and understand that there are these competing events, competing factions, just means that you're becoming a much more well-rounded officer as you start to understand them.
Yeah. Now this next question here, this is Claude actually responding back to something that I put in, because I'll ask Claude, hey, any follow-ups? Are we good to go? And sometimes they give you a follow-up. And this was, you talk about fear-based versus opportunity-based hiding. Can you give us real examples of how these look differently? So, Russ, just to give you some context, one of the questions that were asked was something about different motives for hiding. And, a couple of the things I mentioned, we talked about ego, status, reputation, out of fear, desperation, financial gains. I mean, accessibility, the list goes on. But then I also mentioned sometimes opportunity. You get an officer who's not as thorough. You find an area that's not being searched, or, maybe you look at a routine and be able to exploit the routine. So when they ask, you talk about fear-based versus opportunity-based hiding. Can you give us real examples of how these look different? I looked at it kind of what we discussed before, but again, nothing's 100%. But I looked at fear-based hiding as something that's more impulsive and more short-term. And even though opportunity-based hiding could also be that, depending on how long that window's open, for the most part, I think that once they see that there's an opportunity, I think at the end of the day, there probably could be a chance for something more long-term, because they could be exploiting something that is now a vulnerability, and now they want to try to see how they could play it out. So they may put some tests in to see, if this is really a valid opportunity for something bigger. And then once they decide, hey, this is definitely a vulnerability we could exploit, now that opportunity could eventually be something more long-term, if that makes sense. I know nothing's 100%. There's another way to look at this too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to uncover there. I think that people are really kind of don't understand some of the complexities of things that happen, or where the fear emanates from. One of these guys, he could be told, hey, guess what, brother? You're gonna take this bunch of dope and you're gonna hold on to it for me. And if it gets caught, if you get caught in your area, you're gonna say it's yours. And if you don't, I'm going to make sure that whatever prison you end up in, that you get stabbed. Well, this is a reality that these guys face, and so so they do things out of fear, and sometimes that fear motivates them to be sloppy, and sometimes it motivates them, to take things to a whole new level, and sometimes they're being played by their very own STG, because that's what STGs do. Is they prey upon the weak, and they manipulate people who are naive to the game. And I can just tell you that it's not unheard of, for some guy to get busted for some dope allegedly, and then the STG tells them, hey, you're doubled up now, you owe us double whatever that's worth, and then they get extorted, to send in money, and the dope itself was bunk at the time, actually, and they're just being extorted because somebody tipped off an officer to stuff, not necessarily of their own volition.
Yeah, and I will say, when it comes to this, I mean, the key here is that, again, nothing's 100%, but fear, immediate fear, will probably lead to a more impulsive action. And I think in order to see something as an opportunity, what's it an opportunity for? Could this be something more long-term? So maybe just more something strategic, but I kind of used opportunity as something you're looking to exploit. Okay, so let's get to the next one. This kind of relates to tactical empathy, Russ, but how can officers use this psychological understanding to be more effective in searches? Do you want to go first?
So this really comes back to trying to be a creative thinker and a critical thinker. And so if you understand the motivations of someone and you can use tactical empathy, sometimes you can find that point where you come across the breadcrumbs, and then you manage to follow them in the right direction, and then sometimes you can capitalize, leverage, or exploit their mistakes. And so it's not 100%, and it's not magic, and it's but it is good. It is good thinking, good detective work to be able to take it that far. And so sometimes you have to avail yourself of what those opportunities are and be able to follow them and be able to make the play at the end of everything that happened. And so let me just look a little bit closer at this here. So being able to interrupt what's going on in their heads, and the way that they think about hiding things, and the way they think about exploiting things, and about how they make their money, or about how they have to keep security by having a weapon close by. Knowing those things allows you to capitalize on an opportunity when it presents itself. And so, that's one of those things where, I often, would just, sit outside the office and watch people and their patterns and figure out, who's coming, who's going, and then take kind of an informed guess, and say, hey, you know what? I think morning, before we start breakfast, that we should do a surprise inspection / search of dorm 24. And you know what? More often than not, I could kind of get a little bit of a prediction, inkling, insight into the fact that there would be something there, something worthwhile. And that's kind of one of the things, I point out in the book is the difference between doing a random and exclusionary search and doing a search, based on, observation, intelligence, gut feeling, or what have you. And that's why I delineate the difference between teaching someone how to search and teaching someone how to find, and why those are two very different things.
Yeah, guys, when we talk about this part in the book, Russ brings in the term tactical empathy, and you still have to have boundaries. I mean, again, you have to understand where they're coming from, but you're not becoming them, and you also don't want to feel sorry for them. Like a guy hides a weapon, and it's like, well, I understand why he's hiding a weapon. It's still a weapon, and that weapon could be used on staff out of desperation. I mean, so I think understanding the why matters, because it does fuel you, and it gives you a chance to understand more about what you're actually doing. And I do believe what Russ says is the more you understand these motives, the more you understand how the game is played, you become a very experienced searcher, because technically this is a hunt. Do you know your opponent? Do you know what you're hunting? Do you know why you're hunting? Do you know what you just did when you found that contraband? How does it affect the system? What area right now did you just disrupt, so you can maybe get an understanding of what's going to happen next? What are the possible contingencies of what you just did, and how does that affect the group? So, it really does matter, because in the end, if you truly want to be effective, it's everything from preventing to maintaining to reacting. Everything has a component. And if you really want to understand how to kind of meet all three, then you got to understand why. What's the fuel behind what we're doing and trying to accomplish, and who are these people that we're dealing with, and what are they trying to accomplish? What's keeping them motivated? Because if I'm ready to go at them, I'm not going after the symptom, because technically what they're concealing is really the symptom. I want to try to stop this, and I need to stop it by understanding that system and understand the people that run that system, because usually, I would like to say probably a big percentage, the system is a reflection of the person leading it. You understand the person leading it, you start to understand a little bit more about how the system works. Hey, Russ, what behavioral cues should officers watch for that reveal someone's hiding mindset?
All right, that's a difficult one, because usually when people are giving off cues, they're doing it because they're rattled at that moment in time. When you're talking about all of these underlying motivations and whatnot, they're usually not immediately, at least, rattled about what their motivation is. They know what their motivation is. I'm hiding this for the homies, or I'm hiding this for myself, or I'm hiding this because I have an addiction, or I'm hiding this because I need protection, or I'm hiding this to make money for my family, or whatever it is. And so I don't think that you get much beyond that in a tactical situation. In a tactical situation, we can see things that crop up like fear. We can see things that crop up by being rattled within the circumstance, which is kind of the same thing. But I have my own little ways of rattling guys and putting them on the defensive. And so you can look oftentimes backwards and more easily see what the motivations are than you can going forward. Going forward, when you're reading body language, it's a little bit easier, because you're looking for things that are on the extreme. You're looking for sudden movement, furtive movement, or you're looking for a guy suddenly freezing, or you're looking for the volume to suddenly increase, or the volume to suddenly decrease, or you're looking for over communication. An inmate suddenly has to talk to you, and they have to tell you about something that doesn't even matter, or they have to go into great detail. And so those things are generally more of an easy read. The other things, are a lot more nuanced, and they're much easier to spot with hindsight than they are going forward. I hope that makes some sense.
No, it does. I think when they asked this question back to me, I said, well, you know what, this is a bit more complex, because I agree with Russ. I mean, a lot of stuff you learn after the fact. But Russ mentioned something in the book that's really key too, in section 1, about you don't really want to get caught up so much on analysis. There's going to be time when you just have to act, and at this point here, if they look fishy and there's a concern, just jump on it. I mean, but again, there's always that strategic experience talking from within, and you have to kind of trust your gut a little bit. You're not doing it impulsively. You're leaning on experience. You're aware of what your actions could bring about. But having said that, you got to know enough about the inmates to kind of see if there's any shift. Now, for behavior cues, I gave very simple examples, but again, nothing's 100%. But I thought if you had someone that I said, we kind of discussed on this before, that's driven by fear, they're not pros at what they do. You may see some leakage. They may try to overcompensate being confident. They may constantly kind of stress when people start getting close to certain areas, or they're hyper vigilant to an extreme. But again, this could be an inmate that wasn't that way before, but now there's a shift. And then if you get people that are extremely confident in their game, maybe they're just too confident. Maybe I think that's another sign that you have to watch out for, because some of them are ego driven, and maybe the effort to be too confident is something that showcases, like, why is this person confident right now? I mean, that confident when they're searching their area. I mean, are they really that perfect, or do they really think that we won't catch it? And again, it's hard because there's so many ways that things could go, that you could tell someone, look for this, but also look for this, and they seem to be complete opposites. So I find that the middle is usually where you have to know the inmates, and you have to know exactly, kind of usually a gut feeling of something feels different. In Russ's second story at the very beginning of the book, Russ went on his gut feeling and didn't hesitate. And it turned out to work for him because something didn't feel right. And you know what? I don't have time to really understand what it is that doesn't feel right at this moment. I'm just going to go ahead and act. And then the third story, Russ was able to rationalize some of those gut feelings, and now he could see things in play and then kind of move forward with a bit more of a justification. But prior to that, when you're starting to try to figure things out, stuff is working in your head behind the scenes that you may not be able to rationalize, and you may wait for that rationalization when maybe it's time for you to act. And I think that to me is key. So if there's behavioral cues and your body is reacting to that behavioral cue, but you haven't put a label on it, see what your body's trying to tell you to do. See if there's a response there, and then maybe you should safely, really try to listen to that gut instinct, because 9 times out of 10, that gut instinct is not coming from a place of nothing. It's coming from a place of some experience that has now got into you that you may not realize at the moment, that's now speaking to you. And it's just a matter of trusting yourself in how you want to respond, if that makes any sense. All right, Russ, I got next one. How does understanding inmate psychology help officers maintain better professional boundaries?
So again, there's a lot to this, and I'm going to say this, in the plainest way that I know how, is maintaining professional boundaries is really essential. And I don't care, who cares to try and tell me different on this. What I've seen so far, and I need to examine it more closely, some of the things that have been done specifically in California to try and blur the boundaries has resulted in nothing except, actually, causing more complacency. And I deal with that in a lot of places in my book. There's a lot of places where that comes into play. where we are trying to be the ones with the rapport, the ones trying to urge them to do better, the ones that we're trying to, give some sort of, dosage with regards to therapy, but from a law enforcement perspective. And I think that what that does, I think it dulls our senses. I think it dulls our ability to read what's going on. And I believe that it establishes a rapport that makes us less likely to step in and actually take proactive measures. We've gone from being friendly to being friends. And I think that's ultimately destructive to safety and security. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that disagree with me on that. But that's been my experience. That's been my observation. And right now, if you just want to see where I feel with it is, why don't you look up on the most number of homicides in a single year in California inside the prison system and see whether or not I may or may not be onto something, as it were.
And I will say this for me, Russ. Obviously, I taught manipulation. I do that. I'm a very big fan of giving us more understanding of how the game works. But I think understanding, like Russ said, how the criminal mind works gives you a better understanding of the path that you could be headed down. I just want to make. I want to mention something. My friend William Young wrote a book. It's called Train to Change, basically how the correctional curriculum changes people. I want to add something, and it's a great book. Guys, got to check it out. You got to read it. But I want to mention something more for a safety tip, and it kind of relates to this. The curriculum has to be taught to keep people vigilant. So, of course, what they're teaching you could change a little bit of how you see the world, but you have to interpret it in a way that's beneficial, in a way that could be applied in a balanced fashion. Because again, if I read the book and I say, well, what else is the curriculum going to teach you? They have to teach you. They have to teach you to kind of look for the wolf. They kind of have to teach you to have a healthy level of skepticism, and universal precaution doesn't mean shut off the world. It means to be a little bit more cautious. I think it's not so much what the curriculum needs to teach, but rather one, who's teaching it, or two, how you receive it. And that's why this question matters, because, you can't ignore inmate interactions and say, yep, not falling for traps. No, you are going to have to interact with them. I mean, that's 100%. And you are going to have to be strong enough to create those boundaries and reinforce it. Because some of the people that say, yeah, universal precaution, I don't talk to any inmate. Well, yeah, well, that's bull. And two, it's probably because you're afraid to put those boundaries in place before any dialogue even takes place. I'm not here to be your friend, but what do you need? And if I can help you, I will. If it's not my prescribed role, I won't. But the psychology of understanding who you're dealing with and then having that level of universal precaution is to help you engage, not disengage. So again, Will, great job on the book. I was watching one of your videos, guys. Again, I'm not telling you not to get it. I just want to tell you there's a lot of things right now that are really excuse driven. So people want to basically find a reason that the system has left them screwy, or the system has destroyed who they are. And I really can't live by that anymore, because at the end of the day, you have control of what it is that you allow in and that you allow out. And listen, I work in an extremely active facility. I've been managing prisons now for over a decade. Trust and believe, I'm tired. I'm burned out. And burned out usually happens to people that work. That's the key. People that are passionate are the ones that get burned out, not the people that don't do it, the ones that just feel they put so much in that they're not getting enough back. And with that said, the curriculums are put in play because they have to get you into the right mindset. You have to find how that balance plays out in all areas, including the job, including home life. That's where you need to be invested. That's what you give back. Because at the end of the day, that curriculum cannot change, because you cannot go in thinking the world's okie dokie, because you're going into a correctional setting where it's not going to be okie dokie. So you're going to have to be able to have that mindset that this is what could possibly happen. Now, how do I balance it so it doesn't ruin how I see and deal with everything else? And that's on you, because there's no other way that curriculum will be taught. And the reason why I mention that is that relates to here with the professional boundaries. At the end of the day, you have to engage with that inmate population. And that's where the boundaries are set. The boundaries are not set when you're avoiding engagement under the cliche of universal precaution. And, you know, it's not. It's put in play so you can engage. All right, next step. Sorry about that. What is the most dangerous psychological dynamic you see between staff and inmates when it comes to concealment?
Oh boy, if we just hadn't put that last part on there. You know, I think that where inmates often gain the upper hand, you know, are in these situations where we have inmates that are ostensibly compliant, you know, with everything that's being asked of them, and they are good workers. They are maybe even great workers. And what happens is, from the psychological perspective, when we look at that, you know, that little 3-word clause, you know, quid pro quo, which is this for that, is, you know, I am a good worker. I help you. I take a load of worry off of your shoulders, and therefore, you know, you should let me slide on X, Y, and Z. And I think that the reason that that's dangerous is because there's actually an element of truth to that. I think that, you know, we can go overboard and just be so rule laden and rule oriented that we're not willing. Some of us are not willing, at least, you know, to let things slide and to be flexible a little bit. Problem comes when we're willing to be, you know, when we're willing to, you know, bend over backwards. We're willing to let bigger things slide and, you know, hide things from our vision. And we're not willing to, you know, get in there and, if necessary, you know, do just a search down to the nitty gritty, looking for, you know, little hits of dope or whatever it is, and constantly giving people within those rules enough leeway that we end up never finding what they've got to hide, and they become very good at it. They become very nuanced. And then on top of that, everyone knows that they're the one to go to when they need something hidden. And we can be manipulated that way. We can be played, and we can be put into a position where we're not corrupted, but we're not effective either. And I think that makes sense, and I hope people understand what I'm saying is we can co-opt and corrupt ourselves without being co-opted and corrupted by the inmate population.
No, I agree. I think for me, now I explored this question in a few ways. Now remember, I'm going to favor one thing in particular, but it doesn't minimize every other dynamic. But remember, I wrote books on manipulation. I wrote books on undue familiarity. So I believe, to me, one of the most dangerous things is when an inmate is able to convince you that they're not even worth looking into, or they're not even worth checking to see if anything's hidden, because I'm that guy. I'm okay. It's never going to be me. And I think that comes out in so many ways, because there's so many ways to play that game. There's so many ways to build that familiarity with the officer, and that sense of obligation is a somewhere along with manipulation, undue familiarity, whatever it is, somewhere along the line, there's that level of obligation. You know, the helpful inmate, the inmate that, you know, won't hesitate to say, hey, I did for you. You know, you got my back. And I honestly think in some cases in corrections, maybe there is a human need for this, but you don't want the interactions between you and the inmates to be transactional. because at the end of the day, you know, if the inmates could see that you are dependent on them, they're going to exploit it. Not right away, but they will. They'll exploit it when they've done so much for you that you feel that you have to give back. And to me, that's a dynamic that is extremely dangerous, because under all that is the label of trustee, the label of honor unit, the labels that paint a picture that, you know, this inmate can live on a reputation. But, you know, and it's funny because staff will look at that reputation and then hold that reputation as something foundational and minimize the behaviors that are right in front of them. And they'll learn to justify the behaviors based on a past reputation. And that to me is a very scary dynamic, because that's not something that you, even if I was a peer, I may directly notice. That's something that we have to be aware of, because we're the ones that are being played. So yes, it may be hard to tell that friendly inmate, I don't need your help today. Or it may be hard to write up that helpful inmate. It may, I mean, Russ will give you stories there where, you know, Russ is looking for some asbestos, and Russ, we have to reiterate that story in the book, see if there's a place to put that back in again, because Claude again took a shit on us. But Russ got his eye on something, and here comes the helpful inmate. You know, Russ is looking in the showers for certain things, and this inmate's trying to get Russ to look at some asbestos, because Russ got close to something, and the inmate's coming up as trying to be helpful, and Russ is like, nah, I'm not buying that. Sit down, really don't need you. And then Russ automatically knows there's probably something here, because this dialogue and this inmate, this interaction was out of place. You know, it just
over communication.
Over communication. It's what we emphasize in that area. And we have to revisit that story again, or if we go past the section, maybe I could put it back in. But I want that story. It's such a good story because it does show this dynamic. But with that said, again, just to keep it short, that to me is the scariest thing. It's the way the inmate, a manipulative inmate, can position themselves as that helpful inmate or that friendly inmate to the point where you stop looking because that inmate has convinced you that they're not the one to check, they're one of the good ones. And to be honest with you guys, that could be the inmate that's hiding the most contraband, not even for their own gains, but because the other inmates see that connection between you and him, and I'm going to exploit that. I'm going to exploit that. So even if that inmate did have good intent, if I know he's talking to Russ, I'll put a little fear into that inmate. Or maybe I'll incentivize him a little bit, see how far that goes. But either way, pressure, reward. The inmate Russ thought he knows yesterday, it's not the inmate he's talking to today. Be aware of that. Be wary of that. All right. Hold on, Russ. Next question, Russ. You got three more left, including this one. So 2 more after this. If you could teach one psychological insight to every new correctional officer, what would it be? I could do mine real quick, Russ, if you don't mind. I just kind of said it. No need to reiterate. Inmates are not your friends. And the other thing is, you are not obligated to them. Never put yourself in a position where you'll be obligated to an inmate. Okay, Russ, now you could take this one away.
Okay, so we just touched on this, and this particular thing that I'm going to talk about is so powerful, and it has worked for me so many times in finding contraband. I don't think I can, overemphasize it enough, but it's just what I mentioned, over communication. And so I have a really simple way to identify it and to define it. And the difference is this: is over communication is when an inmate is trying to convince you of something, right? Normal conversational communication is when an inmate is relaying information. So anytime and every time an inmate is trying to convince you of something in a way where they are either being too helpful, too verbose, or like I said, trying to convince you, this is the time to get into your mindset and think, what is actually going on here? What am I trying to be convinced of? And how close do I think the contraband is to me right at this moment in time? And I will tell you, I have used that tool, which I developed on my own, with regards to the whole over communication thing, to find so much stuff you would be astounded. And all it really is, it's just a way of thinking and a way of understanding and a way of knowing that, hey, we are here at a point in time where I'm close to something. I give another example in the book that I'll just touch on briefly, where I found a cell phone and I was accusing another inmate of owning the cell phone. And another inmate says, "That's my cell phone." And instantly, the first word inside my head was, "This is over communication. Something is going on." I thought at that moment in time, actually, that I was about to get attacked. And I ended up finding a lot more stuff, including some Blackberries at that time, for those of you that remember Blackberry cell phones. And so that's what I'll leave you with. And I think me passing that on is going to put a lot of other officers into a position to find more contraband. Just that one little tip.
And that's why we do these shows. Now, 2 more questions, guys. Russ, how did you and Russ Hamilton, so that's basically me, how did I and Russ Hamilton, or Russ Hamilton and I, decide to combine tactical and psychological approaches inside the hide? So these are questions more related to why we wrote the book. Again, I think we kind of discussed that at the beginning, but the key here is, from my perspective, Russ, is that this is a lot more than finding it. It's why was it hidden? I think at the very beginning of the book, I just want to read something to you that's at the very beginning of section 1 of this book. It says right here, it kind of goes right into Russ's story, but here's the intro before we go into Russ's story, just so you guys can hear a little bit of it. The difference between finding contraband and missing it can be measured in heartbeats. In a split second before violence erupts, in the moment before a weapon reaches its target, in the instant before an overdose claims a life or an escape plan unfolds. Everyday correctional staff walk into environments where inmates have nothing but time to plan, time to hide, time to engineer scenarios designed to exploit our weaknesses. They study our routine, map our blind spots, and test our resolve. While we follow procedures, they develop strategies. While we maintain order, they orchestrate chaos. This isn't a game. Lives are on the line, yours, your colleagues, and yes, even theirs. Every search you conduct is a battle for control in an environment where control determines survival. Every missed hide represents potential violence, corruption, or compromise of the facility's security. Every successful find prevents an incident you'll never know is coming. But here's what 20 plus years in corrections has taught us. Technique alone isn't enough. You can memorize every search procedure, master every tactical approach, and still miss what's right in front of you because you're searching spaces when you should be reading minds. You're looking for objects when you should be understanding psychology. You're reacting to behavior when you should be, like Russ said before, predicting it. The inmates who pose the greatest threat aren't the ones who hide things poorly. They're the ones who understand human psychology well enough to make you search exactly where they want you to search, see exactly what they want you to see, and believe exactly what they want you to believe. They're counting on you to be predictable. They're to follow the checklist, to search the obvious places while missing the strategic ones, to read their performance as reality. Almost done. That's why this book exists, to evolve you from a searcher who finds what's easy to find to a hunter who finds what's meant to stay hidden, to transform you from someone who reacts to contraband to someone who anticipates it, from an officer who follows procedures to a professional who reads the psychology driving every hide. This chapter 1, establishes the foundation, understanding the mind behind every act of concealment, because once you understand why inmates hide things, where they hide things become predictable. Once you read their psychology, their tactics become transparent. And last part, the job is dangerous. The stakes are real. The margin for error is razor thin. But armed with the right mindset, the hunter's mind, you can stay one step ahead of people who have nothing but time to plan your downfall. And then that's when it goes right into West Block Yard, 3 lessons in the evolution of a searcher. So from searcher to hunter. I think that covers it. And Russ, I got last question if you want. What can it should be readers, but what can readers expect to learn from this book that they won't find in standard training manuals? And I think we kind of covered it. So anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I kind of came into this and I wrote an article a long time ago, that was published by, let's see, I think it was by Corrections One, and also that same article, I republished it myself in numerous places within Facebook at the time. And the point that I really tried to make about it is that searching and finding are two different things, and that I taught people how to find, not how to search. And kind of like my guiding influence in that was when I looked at, believe it or not, of all things, what the Federal Bureau of Investigations was able to do with their profiling unit, and being able to see, hey, what was going on psychologically with some of these killers later on, many of which I actually knew, and be able to, come across the breadcrumb that was actually able to inform them of, who this individual was, or more specifically, what this individual was about. And so I kind of took that to a lower level, because what we do in corrections, is I'm not demeaning it. I'm just saying that it's one of those things that we can sometimes apply these things to. And I was able to look and see what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we can come across those same type of breadcrumbs in a way, and be able to follow them back to their source. And one of my earlier on successes, I had this one female officer who was up in what we called the foyer, and she was very observant, and she was really good at her job. And one day she was talking to this one individual, and I was much further away, and I didn't really get to hear much of the conversation until I approached it. But I had this gut feeling about the guy, and I just asked her. I said, "Hey, who was that guy?" And she said, "Well, it's kind of odd. He was, just asking directions for how to get somewhere, and he was already out of range. There was no chance of me detaining him at this point, really." And so I said, "Well, what did he do?" And she said, "Well, he came up, and he threw his drink away." And then he came and, asked me for these directions. And, I just got that gut feeling about it. And I said, "Look, I think that this is maybe a drug drop that we're going to intercept here." And so she went and did some searching along his point of travel. And the cup that he threw away had drugs in it. And the night shift was obviously, going to be the ones to actually bring that back in. They were already in, fingers of gloves, and they were already lubed up and ready to go. And that's the way it was going to go down. So, that night we set up a sting operation, and we're ready to take these guys out. We caught them in the act. We didn't expose the real drugs to them at any time. We made up a fake drop for them. And it was just that kind of thing that kind of drove me to, try and become much better than simply, observing and responding and hoping for the best by doing random searches and exclusionary searches, and just not following through on a few tiny little details that some other people pick up, or that I picked up myself. And I think that we've vastly underestimated the potential for those things. And that's why we're writing this book, to try and inspire other people. Not everything that we write is going to apply to other institutions or states, but everything we write is going to apply to the mindset of what's going to be necessary to get out ahead and in front of the contraband game. And that's just really what, I think is the difference between being an impact player and being a, okay, I'll go in now kind of player. So I hope that jives with some people and makes some sense.
But Russ, that's why you're with me on this book. I mean, I know no one could write a book like this. One, because they don't have you. And two, I'd like to be a little bit humble here, but what the hell? They don't have me. We've done videos. We have over 1,700. I mean, discussion. All we do is talk shop. So we have a lot to offer, and we're kind of trying to put it down before we forget it all. Eventually there'll be a time when me and Russ are no longer active in the field at some level, and what happens to all the stuff that's here? That's the key. So I think a lot of people want the fine, but they don't understand the dynamic behind the fine. And when me and Russ were doing a show recently, we actually, right on air, we said, hey, we should write this book. So, and I believe this book will take off. And what's great is we have it documented when we decided to do it. A little bit of history there, if you will. But as we close, Russ, you have anything you'd like to say in closing off?
Yeah, I think that we're at a point right now in corrections that's kind of a scary little bit of a tipping point. There has been some horrible things that have happened. There's even been, staff members, horribly maimed or put into trauma or even killed. And I think that we, really owe it to the people that have, either poured out the full measure or, really sacrificed to try and bring corrections back to where it needs to be. And I say that from the political standpoint and from a practical standpoint. The things that, we need to do in corrections can very much serve the community. It can serve a certain segment of the inmate population. It can certainly serve us. And the answers that we've often been presented with by our, supposed leaders and politicians and so forth, just really ring hollow. I think that, we've been put in a position where, the words, rehabilitation and reentry not only ring hollow, but they ring dirty. And that's not the way it has to be. There are actually real opportunities for reentry and rehabilitation and that sort of thing. But it's not the thing that we're being told by politicians. It's not the thing that is necessarily being addressed by management or by admin. There are places and times and resources for certain things, and there are places and times and resources for other certain types of things. And I think that corrections really needs to get back at the officer level, to being the ones that, really truly manage to, keep that chaos in check. And we need to also be able to, seed some of our, not seed, but to be able to take, the authority that we're granted and help those other programs out at the same time, the reentry, the rehabilitation and stuff. But at the same time, we can't just, take on the mindset of what some of these politicians have done with regards to just letting it, letting everyone, do whatever they want and to never, ever bother to rein anybody in. And I think that there's going to be a reckoning for that. And I think it's going to be happening very soon from a lot of what I've seen. And I think I've waxed kind of a little bit too much into that side of it right now. But I'm willing to go there if I think there's a chance at actually changing some things. And the correctional officer title and the correctional officer ethos and the correctional officer authority and duties that we have and have had in the past really need to be brought back to the forefront, where we are, mandating accountability from the inmates, where we are making sure that the public is safe, that we're making sure that the inmates are safe, and that we're making sure that our brothers and sisters in the correctional field are safe as well. And I think that that's a pretty awesome responsibility to put on people. But I think it's time we got back to that.
Yeah, guys, for me, it's just, again, creating that legacy. I know books like this and topics that we're doing now, there is a gap. So we have done everything we can to fill that gap. When I look back, I don't want to have videos that were just filled of excuses or assumptions, but rather videos that helped evolve the perspective, the profession itself. I want people to be able to look back and be able to find these videos of good use years down the line when, we no longer exist. I mean, that's the key. And, so am I proud of the videos that we put forward? Yeah, because they're videos that did what they can to motivate people forward to try to keep hope, because eventually a job like this, it's never going to, you need a job like this. So let's find a way where we could do it together. So these are just efforts to become more effective. As always, guys, the show is tiered up. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.